Have you ever felt like you're living in a world that doesn't quite fit? Like your mind is constantly struggling against the very reality you're supposed to thrive in? What if I told you that this feeling isn't a personal failing, but a fundamental truth about human consciousness that one of psychology's greatest minds discovered over a century ago? Carl Jung once said something that will change how you see everything. The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. But here's what most people miss. Jung wasn't just talking about mental health. He was revealing a terrifying truth about the modern human condition that we're only now beginning to understand. Your mind wasn't built for this world, and Jung knew it. Think about this for a moment. Right now, as you're watching this video, your brain is processing more information in a single day than your ancestors processed in entire lifetimes. Your nervous system, evolved over millions of years to handle small tribal groups, is now bombarded with the problems of 8 billion strangers. Your attention, designed to focus on immediate survival threats, is being hijacked by algorithms specifically engineered to keep you scrolling. This isn't just discomfort. This is a fundamental mismatch between human psychology and modern reality. Jung called this the collective neurosis of our time. But what he discovered goes deeper than anyone imagined. In his groundbreaking work, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung argued that we're living through the greatest psychological crisis in human history. Not because we're weak, but because we're trying to run ancient software on modern hardware. Here's where it gets fascinating. Jung identified what he called the participation mystique, the way primitive humans experienced reality as interconnected, meaningful, and alive. Our ancestors didn't see themselves as separate from nature, from their community, or from the cosmos. They lived in what Jung termed psychological wholeness. But modern civilization shattered this wholeness. We gained incredible technological power, but we lost something essential, what Jung called the symbolic life. We became disconnected from the deeper patterns that give life meaning. And your brain is paying the price. Neuroscience is now confirming what Jung intuited decades ago. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research at UCLA shows that our brains are fundamentally social organs, wired for connection and meaning-making. But modern life systematically undermines these core needs. We're more connected than ever, yet loneliness rates have skyrocketed. We have access to infinite information, yet meaning and purpose feel increasingly elusive. Jung saw this coming. In 1957, he wrote, "The individual has always been unconscious of his social role. In our time, he has also become unconscious of his individual role. We've lost touch with both our authentic selves and our place in the larger human story." But here's what makes this truly disturbing. Jung believed this disconnection wasn't accidental. It was the inevitable result of what he called the rationalization of the world. As we became more logical, more scientific, more efficient, we systematically eliminated the very psychological nutrients our minds need to thrive. Think about your daily experience. How often do you feel truly present? How often do you experience what Jung called numinous moments, those instances of awe, connection, or transcendence that make life feel meaningful? If you're like most people, these experiences are becoming increasingly rare. This is what Jung meant when he said modern humans suffer from spiritual poverty in the midst of material abundance. We've optimized for everything except what actually matters to human flourishing. The symptoms are everywhere. Rising rates of anxiety, depression, and what psychologists now call existential emptiness. The constant feeling that something is missing, even when life seems objectively good. The inability to be alone with our thoughts. The desperate search for meaning in consumption, achievement, or digital validation. Jung called this the neurosis of our time, but he also saw it as an opportunity. Because once you understand that your struggles aren't personal failures, but natural responses to an unnatural world, everything changes. In his masterwork, The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote, "The individual is the only reality." The further we move away from the individual towards abstract ideas about Homo sapiens, the more likely we are to fall into error. This wasn't just philosophy. It was a prescription for psychological survival in the modern world. Jung discovered that the path forward isn't to reject modernity, but to develop what he called psychological consciousness, the ability to navigate modern life while maintaining connection to deeper sources of meaning and identity. This is where Jung's most overlooked truth becomes revolutionary. He realized that the same forces that created our modern psychological crisis also created the possibility for unprecedented individual development. We can become more conscious, more integrated, more authentically ourselves than any generation in human history, but only if we understand what we're up against. The modern world isn't just challenging, it's actively working against the fundamental structures of human psychology. Social media exploits our need for social validation. Consumer culture hijacks our search for identity. The 24/7 news cycle overwhelms our capacity for emotional regulation. These aren't bugs in the system, they're features. Jung saw that we're living in what he called the age of the masses, where individual consciousness gets swallowed up by collective movements, ideologies, and identities. But he also saw that this crisis would force humanity to evolve psychologically or face catastrophe. The question isn't whether your mind fits this world. It doesn't. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Jung's solution wasn't to retreat from modernity, but to develop what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are beneath all the social conditioning, cultural programming, and collective pressures that shape us. But here's the crucial part most people miss. Individuation isn't self-improvement. It's psychological archaeology. You're not trying to become someone new. You're trying to uncover who you've always been beneath the layers of adaptation to a world that doesn't fit your deepest nature. Jung discovered this through his own psychological breakdown in 1913. At the height of his professional success, he began experiencing what he called confrontation with the unconscious, visions, dreams, and psychological phenomena that would have been considered normal in ancient cultures, but were pathologized in the modern world. Instead of medicating these experiences away, Jung did something revolutionary. He engaged with them. He developed what became known as active imagination, a technique for dialoguing with the unconscious mind. What he discovered changed everything. The unconscious wasn't just a repository of repressed memories and primitive impulses, as Freud believed. It was an intelligent, creative force that contained what Jung called the wisdom of the species, psychological patterns and insights that had guided human development for millennia. But modern civilization had cut us off from this wisdom. We'd become what Jung called one-sided, overdeveloped in rational, conscious thinking, but underdeveloped in intuitive, symbolic, and emotional intelligence. This is why you feel exhausted by modern life, even when you're not physically tired. Your conscious mind is working overtime to compensate for capacities that should be handled by deeper, more automatic psychological processes. Think about decision-making. Your ancestors made choices based on a complex integration of rational analysis, emotional wisdom, social intuition, and what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to synthesize opposing viewpoints into creative solutions. But modern culture teaches us to make decisions purely rationally, ignoring the sophisticated intelligence of emotions, the body, and unconscious pattern recognition. We've become psychological amputees, trying to navigate complex realities with only a fraction of our mental capacities. Jung's research with patients revealed that psychological healing wasn't about adjusting to society's expectations. It was about reconnecting with what he called the self, the deeper organizing principle of the psyche that exists beyond social roles and cultural conditioning. This is where Jung's insight becomes practically revolutionary. He realized that the symptoms we call mental illness are often the psyche's attempt to restore balance. Anxiety isn't just a disorder. It's information about misalignment between your authentic nature and your current life circumstances. Depression isn't just chemical imbalance. It's often what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a necessary psychological process that forces you to confront what isn't working in your life. The psyche literally shuts down non-essential functions to force you to address fundamental problems you've been avoiding. But here's what makes this dangerous knowledge. Once you understand that your psychological struggles aren't personal failures, but natural responses to an unnatural world, you can't unknow it. You become responsible for your own psychological development in a way that's both liberating and terrifying. Jung called this the burden of consciousness. The more aware you become of how modern life undermines human flourishing, the more you're called to live differently. You can't just go back to unconscious participation in systems that damage your psychological well-being. This is why Jung's work was so threatening to both religious and secular authorities. He wasn't offering comfort or easy answers. He was offering a path to psychological sovereignty that made individuals less controllable, less predictable, and less dependent on external validation. The individuation process Jung described involves what he called the integration of the shadow, acknowledging and accepting the parts of yourself that don't fit social expectations, not acting them out destructively, but recognizing them as sources of energy and authenticity that have been suppressed. Most people spend enormous psychological energy maintaining a persona, the socially acceptable mask we wear to fit in. But Jung discovered that this mask becomes a prison when we identify with it completely. We lose touch with our authentic desires, our real values, and our genuine emotional responses. The shadow contains not just negative traits we've disowned, but positive qualities that don't fit our self-image or social role. Your creativity, your wildness, your capacity for joy, your authentic anger at injustice, these often get relegated to the shadow because they're inconvenient or threatening to others. Jung's most radical insight was that psychological health requires what he called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of trying to be consistently good, happy, or successful, mature individuals learn to contain contradictions without resolving them prematurely. You can be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both rational and intuitive. The attempt to be one-sided, to eliminate complexity and contradiction from your personality, is what creates neurosis. This is why modern self-help culture often makes people more psychologically fragmented, not less. The promise that you can eliminate negative emotions, achieve permanent happiness, or become an optimized version of yourself goes against the fundamental structure of human psychology. Jung understood that psychological wholeness isn't about perfection. It's about integration. It's about becoming comfortable with the full spectrum of human experience, including the parts that don't fit neat categories or social expectations. But integration requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in creative tension until a new synthesis emerges. This isn't a mental technique. It's a fundamental reorientation toward life that most people never develop because modern culture doesn't support it. The transcendent function emerges through what Jung called active imagination, the practice of engaging consciously with unconscious contents through dreams, fantasies, creative expression, and symbolic thinking. This isn't escapism, it's accessing forms of intelligence that rational thought alone cannot provide. Jung discovered that individuals who developed this capacity became what he called modern individuals, people who could navigate contemporary life while maintaining connection to deeper sources of meaning and wisdom. They became bridges between the ancient and modern worlds, carrying forward essential human capacities that civilization had abandoned. This is the path forward Jung envisioned, not a return to primitive consciousness, but an integration of ancient wisdom with modern capabilities. Individuals who could think scientifically while feeling deeply, who could engage with technology while maintaining spiritual connection, who could participate in global culture while preserving authentic selfhood. But here's the challenge Jung didn't fully anticipate. The modern world isn't just psychologically misaligned, it's actively accelerating. The gap between human psychological needs and technological reality is widening at an exponential rate. Consider this. Jung developed his theories in an era when the fastest communication was telegraph, when most people lived in small communities, when the pace of change was measured in decades, not months. Today, we're dealing with artificial intelligence, virtual reality, global connectivity, and social media algorithms that can reshape human behavior in real time. The psychological pressures Jung identified in the 1950s have intensified beyond anything he could have imagined. We're not just disconnected from nature and community. We're being systematically rewired by technologies designed to capture and monetize our attention. This is what makes Jung's insights more relevant now than ever. He understood that consciousness itself was under threat from what he called mass-mindedness, the tendency for individuals to lose themselves in collective movements and ideologies. But today's mass-mindedness is different. It's not just political or religious. It's technological. Our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are being shaped by algorithms that know us better than we know ourselves. We're becoming what Jung feared most: unconscious participants in systems that diminish our humanity. The solution isn't to reject technology, but to develop what Jung called psychological consciousness, the ability to remain aware of how external forces influence your inner life. This requires what he termed the development of personality, becoming so grounded in your authentic self that you can engage with modern life without being consumed by it. Jung's process of individuation becomes a form of psychological resistance. When you know who you are at the deepest level, you become less susceptible to manipulation, less dependent on external validation, and less likely to lose yourself in collective hysteria. But this isn't a solitary journey. Jung emphasized that individuation happens in relationship, through what he called the encounter with the other. So, you discover who you are through authentic connection with people who see and accept your full complexity. This is why modern loneliness is so psychologically devastating. We're not just missing social contact, we're missing the kind of deep, authentic relationships that allow us to know ourselves. Social media provides the illusion of connection while preventing the vulnerability that real relationship requires. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious reveals why this matters so much. We're not just isolated individuals. We're part of a larger human story that connects us across time and culture. When we lose touch with this deeper connection, we lose access to the wisdom and resilience that have sustained humanity through previous crises. The symbols, myths, and archetypal patterns Jung studied aren't just historical curiosities. They're psychological nutrients that modern life systematically eliminates. We need stories that connect us to something larger than ourselves. We need rituals that mark important transitions. We need communities that support our growth rather than demanding our conformity. Jung's vision of psychological development involves what he called the realization of the self. Not the ego self that seeks success and approval, but the deeper self that connects you to the universal patterns of human experience. This self is both intensely personal and transpersonal, uniquely yours yet connected to something eternal. This is where Jung's psychology becomes spiritual without being religious. He understood that humans need connection to transcendent meaning, but he also saw how organized religion often becomes another form of mass-mindedness that prevents authentic spiritual development. The path forward Jung envisioned requires what he called the courage to be yourself, the willingness to live according to your deepest values, even when they conflict with social expectations. This isn't selfishness. It's the recognition that your authentic development serves the larger human community. When you become who you truly are, you give others permission to do the same. You become what Jung called a carrier of consciousness, someone who helps elevate the psychological development of everyone around them. But this requires facing what Jung called the problem of evil, the recognition that consciousness itself can be used destructively. The same psychological development that creates wisdom and compassion can also create manipulation and control. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of ethical development alongside psychological growth. The modern world needs individuals who are both psychologically developed and ethically grounded. People who can navigate complexity without losing their moral compass, who can think independently without becoming isolated, who can embrace change without losing their essential humanity. Jung's final insight was that this crisis of consciousness isn't just personal, it's evolutionary. Humanity is being forced to develop new capacities for psychological integration, ethical reasoning, and conscious choice-making. Those who develop these capacities will thrive. Those who don't will be overwhelmed by the complexity of modern life. This is why your psychological development isn't just about your personal happiness. It's about the future of human consciousness itself. Every person who undertakes the journey of individuation contributes to the collective evolution of our species. The world wasn't built for your mind, but your mind can be developed to navigate this world consciously, authentically, and with deep connection to what matters most. Jung showed us that this isn't just possible, it's necessary for human survival and flourishing. The question isn't whether you'll be changed by the modern world. You will be. The question is whether you'll be changed consciously, in alignment with your deepest nature, or unconsciously, in service of forces that don't have your best interests at heart. Jung's most overlooked truth is also his most hopeful. Within every psychological crisis lies the seed of transformation. Your struggles with modern life aren't signs of weakness. They're invitations to develop capacities you didn't know you had. The journey begins with a simple recognition. You are not broken. The world is. And that recognition is the first step toward reclaiming your psychological sovereignty and contributing to the conscious evolution of human culture. Your mind wasn't built for this world, but it can be developed to transform it.